As a child, growing up in Lincoln, Nebraska, I was always curious. Curious about my neighbors, curious about the world around me. My mother can tell you that even when I was 5 years old, I would walk up to the other children on the playground and introduce myself and say, "Hi, I'm Lacey, and you're my new best friend." I knew no strangers. And if we're honest, not much has really changed. So it is no surprise that for the last 15 years, I have been the welcome wagon, if you will, for the largest refugee resettlement agency in Nebraska, welcoming thousands of people seeking safety in our beautiful state. Can you guess which state resettled the most refugees per capita than any other state in the U.S. in 2016? We did. Nebraska has a reputation of being a place of welcome. And in fact, it's a legacy of the United States to be a place of freedom for those fleeing persecution and oppression. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. In Nebraska, we take that seriously. So, as you can imagine, I find myself in a really strange place right now. Currently, there are 68 million people displaced around the world. 68 million. 68 million, honestly, my brain can't even comprehend that number. That's like if we filled this room 136,000 times. And 25 million of those people are children. So in a time when we are facing the largest humanitarian crisis of a generation, the United States is closing its doors on refugees. But who are refugees? Refugees, according to the United Nations, are people who are forced to flee their country in fear of persecution, war, violence because of their race, their ethnicity, their political opinion, their membership to a particular social group. These are people who have to leave with barely the clothes on their backs just to stay alive. Refugees are normal people. And if you take anything away from my talk today, I want you to understand one thing, that no one chooses to be a refugee. No one. Imagine for a moment what it would take for you to leave your entire life, to leave your home, your car, your kids' school, your neighborhood, everything. It would take a lot. But imagine there's a pounding on your door, and before you can answer it, it's kicked in. And you can hear your children screaming for you as you're being pulled from them. And then imagine you're in a dark cell and you have to tattoo your name on your arm so that your family can identify your dead body, because surely you're not making out of here alive. And all of this because you were a different religion. Or imagine that your next door neighbor that you live next to your whole life comes to the door carrying a bloodied machete, and he gives you a heads up. You get 1 hour to kill your wife because she's of another ethnic group. So you gather her and the kids and you run. And you make it miles from your house. And you have to cross the river that is tinted red from the blood of your neighbors. And you're holding your infant daughter, and you are clutching the hand of your 4-year-old son, and you are praying that they do not make a noise, that they do not cry out in fear or hunger or pain, because you know that any noise they make will mean your deaths. No one chooses to be a refugee. But do you know who does have a choice? We do. We have a choice to be welcoming. Even at its height, the United States only resettled less than 1% of the world's refugee population. So the tiny handful, the tiny few that make it to Nebraska are literally a handful in comparison to the global crisis. These are our newest neighbors, and they're not going anywhere. And we have a choice on how we treat our neighbors. So I've had a front row seat for the last nearly 2 decades seeing the power and transformation that welcome has. Not only on the refugees we resettle, but also on the Nebraskans like you who welcome them. So basically, I've been keeping the best kept secret in Nebraska to myself, and now I want to invite you. And I want to invite you like I invited Ellie. Ellie's synagogue sponsored a Syrian refugee family of 7. This family had to flee their beds in the middle of the night so that their children wouldn't be amongst the thousands of children dead in Syria. They had to hold their infant twins on the back of covered trucks, and they were separated and humiliated at the border of Jordan and made to live in a refugee camp. Ellie thought she would buy some groceries, she would get some flowers and come to the airport, and that would be it. Man, was she wrong. She fell in love with this family. And even today, 2 years later, Ellie visits that family twice a week. So I get to see what happens when we welcome with our whole hearts. When that Syrian mom looks at Ellie and says, "You are my sister." And I also want to invite you, when the family from Burma who lived in a refugee camp in Thailand for over 25 years purchases their first home in the U.S. after only living here for 2 years. And then I want you to come along 5 years later when they become citizens of the United States. A truly profound experience considering they have never been able to be citizens anywhere in the world. I personally will never forget the time that the Somali Bantu family gave birth to their 4th child, and they named her Lacey, even though they couldn't really pronounce it. So sometimes she was lazy, which, whatever. Sometimes she was Lacey, but the gesture was not lost. And I also see how welcoming refugees transforms even its harshest critics. The neighbor who hated Muslims and refugees and was mortified when a Syrian family moved in next door, but is now called Big Brother after many cups of tea and is amongst their fiercest advocates. And with these invitations comes food, lots of food, and you will get fed. And nothing restores dignity more than letting someone feed you, and you will get fed, I promise. So welcoming refugees connects us to our higher selves. For some of us, it allows us to put our faith into action. For others, it's a way for us to express our values as humans or as Americans. There are not a lot of opportunities that exist to change a life. This is one of them. There are not a lot of opportunities that exist to see the American dream alive and well. This is one of them. So when we watch the news and we feel helpless and like the problem is too big and there's nothing we can do, I invite you because there is something that you can do. So how do we combat the fear and hatred of refugees? Meet one. Thank you.